Good evening. My name is Jim Stockert. I'm the curator of the Loeb Fellowship here at the Graduate School of Design. When this fellowship was created 43 years ago, it was an idea to have a sort of a sabbatical for practitioners here at the school. But over that time, we have added other dimensions to the program that have integrated it more fully with the educational mission of the GSD. 4 years ago, Dean Mohsen Mostafavi came to me and suggested that we might have a program which has come to be known as the Loeb Senior Scholar. We happily agreed. The idea is to have seminal thinkers from a wide range of fields come to the school for an intensive week or two every year to share their attitudes, their ideas, their perspectives with the students and faculty. They lecture, lead seminars, sit on juries, speak in classes, and are generally available to talk with students and faculty about their work. Tonight I am particularly pleased to introduce the 4th annual Senior Loeb Scholars, Todd Williams and Billie Tsien. I hope you will forgive the somewhat personal nature of this introduction. I have known Todd Williams for a very long time. We met as teenagers, studying architecture at a liberal arts college somewhere south of here. So you know what that's like. You're in a studio all day long, you're in a studio all night long, you're in a studio all weekend long, except that when Todd and I weren't in the studio, we were at track practice. We both ran on the track team. We even ran the same event. So I always knew from all this time with Todd that he would create a very interesting path through life. I didn't know Billie in those days, but I have a feeling that if I had known her during her time at Pembroke, Yale, and UCLA, I'd have felt the same thing about her. I haven't had a lot of personal contact with Todd over the years. I turned to urban planning, and Todd, of course, charted the course I suspected he would. Early work with Richard Meyer, the discovery of a life and professional partner in Billie Tsien, the formal establishment of their firm in 1986. From the beginning, they have designed a fascinating variety of projects. A college at UVA, the highly regarded Neurosciences Institute at La Jolla, several striking homes, the Cranbrook Natatorium, the American Folk Art Museum, the East Asian Library at Berkeley, the Rubenstein Atrium at Lincoln Center, college dormitories, a church, a student center, 2 skating rinks, their pro bono work for the Robin Hood Foundation Public School Library Initiative, and, of course, the Barns. Until I get to the Barns, you didn't even hear 2 of the same type of building. And the awards, the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in 2003, both elected to the National Academy, both elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters, too many national, regional, and local AIA awards to count, and this year, the AIA Firm of the Year. Then, maybe 10 years ago, my wife and I were in New York when we decided to visit the American Folk Art Museum. We were transported. The facade was so engaging, the materials so fascinating, the detailing so thoughtful, and the spaces led us through the exhibits in such remarkable ways that I realized Todd and Billie were not just 2 good designers whose work photographed well. They somehow instinctively knew what would move people who were going to visit this place. No 2 of their buildings tempt even the most seasoned art critic to speak of a Todd and Billie style. They are among our very best designers at getting inside a program, finding the essence of what the clients want, imagining intensely a user experience that they would like, and then creating a building that will inhabit its site as if it had meant to be there for years. A couple of years ago, I asked Todd what parts of the design process he specialized in and what parts Billie was best at. He said, "We design together. By the time a building is finished, we can't even remember whose ideas were whose." What a statement about 2 strong designers immersing themselves in the process so passionately that the concepts overwhelm any desire for personal credit, and quietly spectacular buildings emerge. Take some notes here, www.twbta.com. Later tonight, or early tomorrow morning, go to their website and read the essay entitled Slowness. It's in the section marked Of Interest. You will read one of the most eloquent statements of the craft of architecture you have ever seen. It is a straightforward, elegant, compelling statement about what it means to take on the almost sacred responsibility to shape the built environment that all of us will occupy. You will be moved. Just one more thought before I let these remarkable architects tell you how they work. 3 years ago, we changed the makeup of the Loeb Fellowship Selection Committee to include 2 outside practitioners who were neither members of our faculty nor Loeb alumni. I decided to take the chance that I could talk Todd into filling one of these roles. Several people told me he was a famous and very busy architect and would never agree to do this. They were wrong. He said yes almost immediately. Some other people said, well, maybe he'll agree to be on the committee, but he'll never have the time to do all the homework that's necessary to really study the candidates. Wrong again. Todd has come to each of our meetings extremely well prepared with thoughtful comments about each of the serious candidates. He's been a wise and committed member of our committee and is one of the reasons we've had such strong Loeb Fellowship classes for the last few years. I know this experience gave me a small glimpse into the way that Todd's and Billie's studio work and that you're about to hear about. So, if you think you know what Todd and Billie's next building will look like because you saw the last one, guess again. And if you think you know what they're about to share with us because you've heard them lecture before, I'll bet you're going to be surprised. Please welcome 2 of America's truly thoughtful and creative designers, Billie Tsien and Todd Williams.
Wow, thank you, Jim. That's great. Overdid it. Well, this is our studio, and we're starting with this because, the composition of the people, this was taken a few months ago, actually, I think in November. This is the space we work in, and these are the people we work with. And my desk is somewhere behind those, and so is Billie's. So our desks are the same as any other person in the studio. We really believe in the idea of family. It's clear that we are the oldest and the leaders of this group, and every single person there is an architect, actually, in my mind, even if most of them don't have their license. But I think that one of the things we wanted to talk about today is that certainly we as architects believe that the work, it's about the work, but in a way I think that as we've come to live life, we believe it's actually just as much or even more about the way we work as the work itself. So certainly we're after the work to be inhabited and to live longer than our lives, in fact, live centuries if possible. But we actually believe, much more importantly, it's a little like a family. You actually want the family to be healthier than you are. You want them to live on, and you want them to be stronger and better than you are. And I think that's really what it's about.
So we're going to show about 8 projects, and each project will have a sort of precedent. Although I suppose one could say that this is the precedent of precedents, because we're going to show you where we worked and lived for more than 25 years.
Well, I lived there for 37 years.
Well,
you happen to live there just for 35 or 4 or 3, I don't remember. But it's right up there where that arrow is. It's on the top floor of Carnegie Hall. When Carnegie Hall was built nearly 50 years ago, Andrew Carnegie believed that it should be surrounded by artist studios that would help to pay for the main hall that was there. And so there were 160 studios made, and eventually they dwindled to fewer and fewer. But in 1972, I was lucky enough to move from the 11th floor to the top floor, which was this alone. It was our balcony.
This is our backyard.
It was a tiny studio, but and at first I shared it with 2 other friends and my children in first marriage, and then Billie came into my life, and we practiced from there, but lived there until 3 years ago.
So a lot of you know the regular performance hall, but some of you may not know about all of the studios that were there. They had ballet lessons. There were people taking flamenco lessons, people making violins, people making bows. So it was a very vibrant and kind of crazy place, filled with quite a batch of idiosyncratic characters. Well, I mean, one of them is was Bill Cunningham, the person who takes all of the fashion photographs, people in the street, and he lived in a tiny little room with a bathroom down the hall. So it was a sort of real collection of characters. But this is a plan that Todd drew of our space when we realized that we were all going to be evicted from the building.
So the gray area on the right, the tone gray area, the elevators, it stopped a level below. And then we walked up the fire stair here to the top floor. That's Billie's shoes and my shoes. Bike behind the door, coat closet. This was at one time our drafting instruments, but it became the couch and a chair. And you'll see this room, what was our conference table, which was a door cut off, and became our dining room, and a 6-foot-long kitchen with 2-burner hot plate, under-counter refrigerator, kind of little reading room back here, and our son's room, which was the size of a bed. But we adored the space. It was, having lived there, this was really taken actually 2 or 3 days before we left. The skylights were fantastic, and the reason we're showing you this is, in a way, our life invades everything we do. The way we lived is actually part of our work, and that's why it's the precedent for all projects. Those 2 windows were the windows into our son's room. That's why he left home at the age of 15.
He didn't leave home, he went to boarding
Actually,
school.
weirdly enough, we're going to show, this is now, I'd never thought about this. We'll have to think of this at the end, Billie.
What?
Just the end of the lecture, okay. Good talk. At any rate, the stuff we collect is from the junk we made with our son, to pictures of a family, to some objects that we found and others that were real art pieces.
But I think we're very, very interested in the objects of other people's culture, and we find that they feed us as well. So we try to surround ourselves with those kinds of pieces, things of other people's lives.
This is now the first of the 8 projects we'll show. The American Folk Art Museum, and we're showing this, which is a house as a precedent to that project, a house on 72nd Street that was done some years before, actually 20 years ago, and it was the cutting through of light into the center of the house so that you would have light all the way through the house, and a relatively mute facade that was the precedent for the Folk Art Museum, a sectional building. And the museum, as you know, is right next to the Museum of Modern Art. And unfortunately, they've moved out 2 years ago. They couldn't afford to keep the space. I think you could blame it on 2008, but you could blame it on many things. But Museum of Modern Art now owns the building, and we're excited and tremulous, I suppose, wondering what will happen, what will be its fate. We haven't been told. Folk art is the art of people who are untrained. Everyone knows that. And some of them people are untrained because they've been in jail, or they've never been educated, or they've, in the case of Bill Traylor down here, who was a freed slave, or they could have been a painter, basically, who is thinking about European art and doing portraiture, as we see here. But it's always done by untrained people, and it's always small and intimate. And it's very much like the things we like to collect.
So the site was really the size of 2 townhouses. It's about 40 feet wide, 100 feet deep. And the building was quite small, but we wanted to make it feel very personal, because folk art itself is a kind of direct connection between the heart and the hand. And these are some of Todd's earliest sketches where he's, if I think of one of Todd's major obsessions is how you move, is moving through space, how you move all the time. I think I'm a person who wants to think about being still, and Todd's a person who always thinks about wanting to move.
But at any rate, I think certainly it's also has to do with architectural promenade and the sense that the step itself is the measure of a person, and is the sort of pump for our imagination.
So the earliest sketches, I think, showed Todd trying to think about how you could move without stairs and become a kind of Guggenheim in a shoebox, but it turns out that that actually doesn't work at all.
And the sketch on the right really was the seminal sketch for finally accepting that we would have an elevator and a fire stair through here, and there would still be stairs through the building. Early models of the building were studying whether we would bring light in from the top, or whether we would and whether we'd go deeper into the ground. In this early sketch model, we decided to go with that model, which is to have people come in on the ground level and then to inhabit the building vertically and put the offices and the auditorium down at the lower level. The plans, each of the plans as you move through the building is different, but there's a logic to them, and one is continuously moving around a changing central core of space. We wanted to make sure that the journey was always complex, and by being poured in place, we were able in the 85 feet to get an additional floor of space in the building, but that meant that actually curating the exhibits became not a white box, but actually always a kind of a creative act in itself. The model in the final project.
And then this is the ground floor of the building when it opened. The back of the building is a skylight because the building sets back from the back of the site. And the materials are really trying to be as close as possible to the actual materials of the construction. So most of the concrete was bush hammered and exposed, and the floors were terrazzo ground, actually the structure of the building.
So this is the primary stair moving up through the building, and we decided that along the stair we would install exhibits behind glass so they wouldn't need guards. And at that time we were still in late 1990s, really verging on 2000. We were still drawing everything by hand and just began to convert to the computer. But we still have an absolute intimate interest in watching how all of the elements of a building are coordinated. So the stair happened to be poured in place concrete, cantilevered from that stair. One cantilevered these 30-foot tall fiberglass panels, and from those panels we then cantilevered the handrails. And it moved through space, and you can see the slab is the slab that we walk on is here, poured in place concrete and wood in the galleries.
When the museum was sold to the Museum of Modern Art, we sent a photographer in to take some final shots of the space before the space is closed down.
This is one of the installations. The elements of folk art were installed on the concrete walls. It was intended that some things not be permanent, be memory elements, much as we have in our life, and others change. So it was a very particular building.
Made for a very particular collection.
And I think that the Museum of Modern Art could easily put their outsider art or the similar art, because it's certainly been now finally seen to be crucial to all contemporary art. Wood floors here were reclaimed wood from the Pacific Northwest. Very, very spectacular sectional building, always aware of the structure as you move through it. And the facade then was also intended to be actually simultaneously normative, much like a kind of mask facade, but it was intended to hold the 85-foot height that was on the street and the edges of the street, but then folded in a way as a hand. And Billie and I went to, that time people were thinking that titanium was a great way to have a facade of a building. So we said probably not in this building. We wanted it to be much more of the earth, and went to a foundry in Beacon, New York, and developed with them open cast panels. Here I am actually picking one up, and so we learned, Billie on the left making marks in the sand. So we experimented there in the foundry till we found a system that was useful for making the facade.
So these panels are just the test panels, but they're raised up here. We're looking at the process of casting directly on the sand. In the end, the panels themselves were cast still on the sand, but in a much more controlled rather than open pour. But one of the things I was saying to the students yesterday is that so much of what we do, I mean, people think that we are sitting around inventing materials and pulling ideas out from the sky. But what we really do is to go to places where people make things and understand what they're doing, take their knowledge and see what we can do with what they know. And actually, that's much easier than trying to invent something from scratch.
So actually, the next project is the atrium, I think Rubenstein Atrium it's called, at Lincoln Center. This is a public-private space, and actually it's, I think, the most popular one of 500 and some in New York, I'm happy to say. It's really not part of Lincoln Center, but it was in the front yard of Lincoln Center. And as a precedent for that, we're just showing one image of the natatorium at Cranbrook that Jim mentioned. It was the sky plane that, there were two things that excited us about this pool, and we've held in our minds for a long time. One is that it's not air conditioned, it's naturally conditioned, and it's breathes through the roof opening and the walls opening hydraulically, but it's really the magical ceiling that allows us to both be a space that's contained and a space that's open. So we saw that the canvas of the ceiling is an important canvas that we have as architects.
So Lincoln Center decided to take over one of these privately owned public spaces that had fallen into disrepair because it was really their kind of front doorway, because it ran between Broadway and Columbus, which is the street that passes in front of Lincoln Center. It's a totally interior space, as you can see from this diagram. So it's a space where in the past it was used in the earliest days as the entrance to the Harkness Dance Theater, and when that failed, it became a kind of climbing wall, and basically it's sort of de facto homeless shelter.
What we remember is that climbing wall, but it didn't work very well. And finally, this place was really taken over by the homeless, and it was a mess in Lincoln Center with Scofidio, Diller, and Renfro working on their campus. They realized that they also wanted to make the neighborhood a better neighborhood, and so they saw this as an opportunity to clean up their front door. And so this is, in fact, a space that is public. So we worked both with Lincoln Center and the city to try to make a space that is open 365 days a year from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, and is really a public space, but is also being cared for by Lincoln Center. So this is the plan that is a T-shaped plan, but one is basically walking from Broadway here through to Columbus Avenue and descending over 4 feet through that space, and also descending slightly here to 62nd Street.
But going back to the image of Cranbrook, one of the things we're very aware of is that when a space is so public and needs to accommodate so many things, the one plane that is kind of untouchable that you can still control is the ceiling. So the ceiling is really a kind of guide or a sort of pathway, kind of banner from the front to the back, and is painted this sort of golden color and has these oculi in it, some of which open directly to the sky and some of which have artificial light.
And on the walls, Lincoln Center actually projects films, but then the background of the wall is a fabric, a felting on both sides that really absorbs sound. So this is a great space for working on a computer or having a private meeting or an event in the evening. On the other side, a felt project work. Actually, I first drew this as a kind of model, in a way, as a drawing of the ceiling, and Claudia Youngstra from the Netherlands, who's a great friend, had this felted and then put the panels up, and she was so successful, and they were so happy with her work, and we were so happy that the next time around she created a more robust work, which is this, using actually the wool from her lambs and the dye from her plants.
So everything is really coming straight from her. And then there are these two vertical plant walls. And the whole idea of the space is to make a place that was serene, that would welcome you if you were having a glass of champagne before you sat in your $500 seat at the opera, or if you were homeless and you needed to sit there all day. It's a place of dignity, and it treats everybody with dignity.
Here we used a stone that we were trying to also indicate that even though it was an enclosed space, it was also about nature. And in fact, on pleasant days, the two doors on either end open up, the air conditioning's turned off. heating's turned off, and so we used green stone for the benches.
And they have free performances every Thursday night, which are packed. And it's also often, a venue for things that happen during weeks like Fashion Week.
But in the past, they annually do have 750,000 people a year just go through the space. The next project also comes in a way as an inspiration both from our experience in Carnegie Hall. It's the Logan Center for the Arts at the University of Chicago that we won as a competition. Don't love competitions at all. We won this one. The reason I don't love them is that you don't get to work with the client. They always expect the answer to be perfect in the competition brief as completed. We don't believe that. This project, though, has a precedence with a project here at the University of Pennsylvania called Skirkanich Hall, and it's an engineering building with a small courtyard, but it came after folk art, and Eduardo Gallant asked us to do an infill building that would connect his engineering quadrangle. But one of the most interesting things we did in this building is to take the fire stair and turn it into the primary stair that moves up, and it's a 3-bay poured-in-place concrete stair that then ascends through the height of this building. It becomes really a wonderful place to be, to look out into this courtyard on the right. Our competition idea was really this, the tower in the field for the University of Chicago. And it's a kind of message that also exists if you know Chicago. You only have to go a little to the west or to the north or to the south, and there are the vast fields of Illinois and Indiana and the plains, but they're also the towers of Chicago. So our concept was a tower and a field.
So our project is located on the south side of the Midway, and most of the undergraduate buildings and the neo-Gothic campus occurs on the north side of the Midway. So what they were trying to do is make a visual performing arts center that would bring undergraduate students across the campus, but also give them a place where these various departments could cross-fertilize, and students could move from one department to another.
So music, for example, and which was an isolated department from theater. Painting was isolated from them both, and they were small departments, but they were vital, and so they wanted to create a kind of mixing bowl of the arts in this site, which, as you can see, is largely a parking lot, but which looks across at the campus. And so we used the idea of the towers and then Chicago in the distance here, and the lake out on the side as the kind of basic concept for the building. This was our competition entry, and I should say that we won with this idea, again, the tower and the base, but it was hardly affordable and it would have been completely impractical. And ultimately, fortunately, the budget made us reconsider our scheme. In fact, at one point, we even told them, we have to get rid of this tower. It's ridiculously expensive and it's way too overblown in this design. But they believed in the idea of the tower and the base. And so we worked with that concept. And slowly but surely, we came back into budget and the building was built this last year. But this shows a kind of way that we tried to mix the arts in the tower, because Carnegie Hall had been a mixing bowl of the arts in the tower, and we loved that community, and we believed that you could have different elements stacked, and that you would use the stairway, in this case the fire stair. The two fire stairs then are open to the wonderful views as a kind of way to move up and through the building. This is the diagram of the building. Three levels. The center level actually is the campus level. So most activity occurs here, and you descend one level, or you ascend one level, or you then rise up in the tower. But the color coding helps to distinguish the different departments that then were mixed in the building. And here we were struggling to try to make that tower ever simpler and more affordable to build. It's very compact and yet still as vertical as we could make it.
We also wanted to make a building solid. I think what we've done throughout our work is always think about buildings that are weighty, think about buildings that are primarily solid. And then, of course, the Gothic towers across on the other side, some neo-Gothic towers, are also very solid stone towers. So we're reacting to that as well. And this is a later model, which then shows the sort of long, low building lit by north-facing skylights, and then the tower building with only some openings. Our buildings are really designed from the inside out, so the windows that occur in the tower have everything to do with the program that's happening inside the building.
So this is really the section of the building that was the earlier conceptual idea. So we have a theater here for 550 students, a film study center here, a screening room here, and there are dance spaces, performance, and a performance penthouse at the top, music rooms scattered throughout this building, and again, the long, low base of the arts complex. This is it now completed. One of the few towers on this south side. There will be more looking out at the lake. All of the skylights here face north and drink in beautiful light. The south face of them are solar panels. And the building, which is made of actually a stone from Missouri and 4-foot-long bars that are like brick bars. And instead of using Indiana limestone, we chose this stone because we like the variety of its color and also its cost, which was much less than Indiana limestone. What we can see here is the actual fire stair rising up through the building with the views on this side. At this point, the views turn to the side and then they resume here. So you're constantly interested in moving up this stair, but which is a triple bay stair, so it's kind of an experience in itself. And up at the top, the performance penthouse, a balcony here, and a classroom that opens out is an open-air classroom at certain times of the year. The lowest level is a cafe we see here, and then a courtyard that connects to older buildings as part of the complex.
So making use of the great natural light that comes in from the skylights, and actually thinking back to our time at Carnegie Hall when we were under similar large skylights and how wonderful it was to live underneath it. This is the large shop, and then the art studios that are also in that low, flat building. Moving up, looking down onto the roofs, you can see the courtyard that exists between the older buildings and the new buildings. So we're trying to make a connection and use that space in between in a positive way.
Yeah, this is the old buildings that were used as the art complex. This becomes a kind of interesting residual courtyard and bridge that connects the tower to the base. One of the small lobbies, this lobby feeds three theaters, the one for 550 students, the one back here for a proscenium theater and a black box theater. So it's a small compressed lobby that actually is rarely used, but when it's used, it's full of energy and then spreads out into the courtyard.
And here we're working this time with a much more commercial felt, but one that was actually developed for the fashion industry. So a lot of the walls are covered in this felt, and we've made the designs, and then they produce the designs. These stairs take you up to the outdoor terrace, and here you can see that some of the artists, both teachers and students, are starting to do installations in the space. These are double samples. We work a lot with a company called Heath in California, and they're standard tiles, and we ask them to double dip the tiles so that they have two colors on them. And one is more glossy and the other is flatter, so they have different reflective qualities. And here you can see these are the tiles as they sort of move down a kind of stairway, really kind of indicating that there's a stair and a presence down below.
Here we are in one of the fire stairs using the tiles again to animate some of the hard surfaces, but the stairs are poured in place concrete, and as you go up and through the building, you can sort of see out to the campus anywhere. Here, another teacher has made an installation on the stairs.
So it's really kind of a combination of the thinking that went into folk art, and then the kind of stairs that you saw at Skirkanich, and then perhaps a more lively sense of color coming from the tile, and then also coming from the felt. So here you can see that two-story spaces are united by these large felt designs that are then just sort of glued to the wall. And actually, the felt is very, unlike Cloudy's felt, which is very beautiful, not quite so tough, this felt is extremely tough. It's used also for hospitality, which basically means hospitality and hospitals. It's good for vomit and other things. I mean, it's very, very
Nice, really nice.
very
Thank
tough.
you, Billie. So here it is again, it's in the wall. We used it as graphics for alcoves for people to both understand what floor they're on. And we've always loved teaching at Yale because of the Paul Rudolph building, but we don't love the fact that we occasionally are confused in the fire stairs. So here you're not very confused. One of the seminar balconies up in the building.
So here the windows can be closed, of course, because it's Chicago, but they can also be open on nice days, and then the room just opens out to the midway.
And then as we move up through the building, another art installation here in the lobby outside the performance penthouse.
I think
More of
reacting
the
to the
felt
felt.
ideas. And then the performance penthouse used here for an acting class, and then the next image used for a performance in the evenings. So it's great. It's now, the building is really fully occupied and it's full of life, and it's been a little less than a year, but it's at least an exciting place for the campus. And it's started to animate also and make a good connection to the south side of Chicago here, so that they've made a large community outreach to the south to try to help to engage the community in the building too. The Barnes Foundation. So we could say there are many precedents for this, but one of them is certainly thinking about a private home. The Barnes Foundation in Marion was the private home of Albert Barnes and his wife Laura. Here the Frick Museum and Isabel Gardner could be a similar one, more or less at the same time, where you actually have a garden in the building. And this was one of the ideas that we had when we were thinking about the Barnes Foundation. We're also thinking about bringing in light in indirect ways, and you'll see this further in the building, but this is the East Asian Library in Berkeley, which is a character language library, which is really significantly research and books that need protection from the light, but really borrowing the light and bouncing the light in through the center space to give a sense of orientation. So this too looks back to the Folk Art Museum.
So this is the site of the Barnes Foundation in Marion, which is both a place that teaches a kind of a way of looking at art, which is the Barnes method, and then it's also a horticultural program. So it was an arboretum when Barnes bought it, and then he hired Paul Cray to design both the house, which is connected with a kind of porte cochere, to this gallery space, and the gallery space holds his collection. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the collection, but it's an amazing collection of Impressionist and post-Impressionist art that is also interspersed with hardware. And he considered the hardware the equivalent of the paintings. They were considered as art in themselves, and he was also a very, very early collector, a very serious collector of African art. So it's an extremely eclectic collection presented in a very idiosyncratic way.
But he believed that no information was needed. You simply could look at the relationship, let's say, of the piece of hardware that we see here above the painting, and a painting here that tends to find a relationship actually right up through. These are the first very, very large in situ murals that Matisse did in 1922 for Albert Barnes. And Matisse was commissioned specifically to do that. And below them we see both a Matisse and a Picasso. Matisse was upset that at that time you couldn't look out into the garden. He said you need to open these to the garden. He was also upset to find that there were African motifs really adjacent to his mural, although he collected African art. And he also said that Barnes should get rid of these two paintings, which were his and Picasso's. But Barnes was a feisty person and a difficult personality, but he also didn't believe in intellectuals and believed that all people should have access to the gallery, even if it happened to be in this very exclusive area of Philadelphia.
So after a lot of controversy and legal dealings, Barnes decided to move and got a site in downtown Philadelphia, and they interviewed 5 different architects. And we really just came in with some very simple things. One of them was this diagram. We said, the building now is a gallery in a garden, and we'd like to make the building feel as if it's got a garden inside it, because it was such an intense experience, and in many ways so claustrophobic, that we felt that you needed some sort of sense of respite in order to be able to truly appreciate the amazing works of art.
But Billie,
there.
this is the way we work. We start out with a shred of an idea. That was the idea you saw. Billie actually wrote those words, and that was part of our presentation as this little model, which is really the size of, I'm holding in my hand, a little wood block model, solid wood, that we pulled apart and dropped in the green bars and the luminous bar, and then set it on a very crude base. So in all cases, we'll come up with a very crude idea, a shred of an idea that we hope the client will either endorse, and if they don't endorse, we'll work to try to find a new idea that's right. But generally, the idea is given some support, like the University of Chicago, and eventually it can become a project in and of itself. And I think that's the idea, is that we're sharing the responsibility of developing a project not only with the client, but with the site and the program.
So one of the conditions that was placed upon the Barnes in order to move their collection was that the ensembles had to remain intact, so all of the hardware, everything needed to be hung exactly the same, and the sequence of the galleries had to remain the same. So we knew that we had to deal with the galleries as they were, but we believed that you could sort of cut through these walls and sort of insert these spaces that would give a sense of relief.
Well, you can see the models here, the progression of models we won't go through. They always had the galleries in the same location as we presented them in this place, and they always had a garden and a place of rest in them. But the building itself changed as we developed the project. And this is the project complete last spring about the same time. Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Free Library here, both Trumbauer buildings, the Paul Kray Rodin Museum, and this City Beautiful idea from really the 1890s, working with Paul Kray, is one of the central elements of Philadelphia, and is clearly influenced by European and French thinking, Beaux-Arts thinking. This building, our building, now sits as part of that, and we wanted to feel like it was part of the buildings that were on the Parkway, that it both was of its own time, but also felt like it belonged.
So this idea of a gallery in a garden and the garden in the gallery, we worked with Laurie Olin and wanted to make a kind of procession where you would walk through a series of gardens that became increasingly more intimate, and that you would leave the city behind before you actually went into the gallery. So along the Franklin Parkway, there are rows of London plane trees, and we reinforced the rows and kept the London plane trees, but introduced a very, very long table of water, which is a kind of civic gesture to the parkway, both in its scale and in its direct visual connection to the parkway.
People can enter the site from the south side here. This is the gallery that we talked about. The east side, the north side, or rarely, but still the west side. There's parking along this edge. But our idea was that you always had to walk through the gardens to get into the building. We wanted it to be a journey.
So the L shape that you see that is green at the top of the building is actually just the planted roof of the sort of L-shaped building. So it looks like a garden, but it's actually the top of the building.
And the plan is quite simple. One of the good things we had is that these weren't always to remain intact, and these were finally our two inserts, a study center and a garden that we inserted in that sequence. Today there are changing exhibits gallery. Actually, this end of this month, Ellsworth Kelly will have work installed through there. We have a cafe they didn't have, and they have conservation that they didn't have, and educational classrooms they didn't have. So what was 40,000 square feet of educational center in Marion is now 90,000.
And the light court.
Oh, yes. In between these two is a grand space, half of which is inside and half of which is outside, but all of which feels remarkable. It's a building now that is the first, I think, really significant, you could call it museum from ground up, that is a platinum LEED building. So the entire top of the box here is, as actually in Chicago, 11% of the energy is given by the PV panels on the top of the building. But saving water and a number of other efficient gestures is really critical for making this building be one that will last, we hope, for a very, very long time indeed.
So it has, I think, several different sort of personas that overlap, and one is a fairly traditional and somewhat conventional-looking persona from the Franklin Parkway. The building still has a neoclassical planning because we have the same floor plan as Cray developed, and so the windows are all symmetrical. But then there's also the sort of light box, which is a kind of another sort of personality. Here you're walking past that long table of water, and then once you proceed past the table of water and ascend, you're in a much more quieter space. And this quiet table of water, I'm not sure why these keep on going off and on, but it's not me. You pass along this water and then turn into the large portal.
And the building seems opaque, but it's actually full of light. The facade we developed as a kind of we felt it was like a fabric of cloth that would wrap around all of the buildings. And there are basically the two buildings, the L-shaped building and its independent building of the Marion Galleries. And that we hoped would act as a kind of counterpoint to the symmetrical apertures of the galleries. And so we looked into kente cloth. We, as Matisse, collect African fabrics and thought about the idea of panels floating across a surface, and which we here have as a rain screen. And some are real windows. In this case, these are real windows. In other case, we're just looking at the stainless steel backing of the panels, all of which are over 2 inches thick, and all of which the stone is a limestone that comes from, so that it felt like it was part of the parkway, not Indiana limestone or Tennessee pink, but in this case from the Negev in Israel.
And having visited the quarry, we saw that there were both interesting ways of treating the stone that we didn't know about, and that the variation in color was quite great. And in order to keep the price low, and because we actually believe in the variation of the color, we accepted full blocks and didn't ask them to reduce them down so that they were consistent. In fact, we embraced the fact that they would be very inconsistent.
And then we asked them to cut them in sizes that they thought were the best way to use the entire block, rather than sizes that we predetermined. And then working together with them, we created panels that used a variety of different sizes, all of which they could easily handle. There are elements that cast shadows that are negatives and positives. You walk in, the building doesn't stretch out. You actually walk through the garden, then into the body of the building as you enter. And as you enter, you ascend or descend in wooden stairways. So the public uses wooden stairways. The private fire stairs are poured in place concrete, as you've seen before. As you entering, you actually walk in this way, but then turn to your right. You're looking straight through this clear glass wall. Actually, we'll look at that later. And on the floor, we see a mosaic that Billie suggested they make using the form of a liar's cloth.
Which is
rug.
a traditional African weaving pattern.
So one has just stepped in here, and then you see the large light box, once again using irregular wood, this case the substructure for the Coney Island Boardwalk. The Ipe becomes a kind of carpet in the center. And here we can see the galleries right across the space, with the windows exactly as they were, and a view here into the garden that we talked about. And the section through the skylight, again, using some of the thoughts we had, which is that light always changes here, but is continuously bouncing in, so that we don't get too much light into that space, but it feels always as if it's the change of day.
And then this is where the light box cantilevers out over the outdoor space, and it actually switches its orientation, so the light is coming in from a different direction. But it's really to extend the indoor and the outdoor space so that that light court is also a kind of garden. So there's a literal garden within the gallery, but then this is also thought of as a kind of garden, a quiet space.
Doors that close from the gallery, sketches that Actually, these sketches were done about a year and a half ago, so the doors were one of the last things that were made. But here you can now look into the main gallery and you see that actually you can really, truly look outside. And that is a kind of ha-ha condition in the middle of summer where you're looking out past cars that are in the distance today with the leaves not on. You might see cars out there, but the idea is that you could look right into the garden from the galleries. And then we've changed, the paintings are exactly as they were within an eighth of an inch. The door frames are exactly as they were within an eighth of an inch, and the volume is exactly as it was. But we've changed virtually everything in this gallery, from the flooring, which is a variation on what they had, to the color of the wood, to the way that the space is lighted. So the space is actually lighted by lighting the room, working with Paul Morantz, we're lighting the room, and then using natural light. So people are shocked. They say the paintings have been cleaned, but they've not been cleaned at all, and they say it's exactly as it was. Well, you can see on the right, actually, the windows were white painted windows. This is the wood that one had. The dimension that we had here between this and the painting was identical. The cornice would be identical.
So everything feels the same, but everything is different. And in a way, it's recreating people's memory of something that didn't exist. So people will come in and they'll say, I'm so glad you used wooden windows just like they had at the barns. And we just sort of nod and kind of smile because they were always white painted metal windows. So it's trying to sort of understand the sort of spirit of the space and then try to make it better.
Another thing worked very hard, and you can see some cases, if you've never been there, are just so absolutely stuffed with work. I mean, given that there are 181 Renoirs and more Cézannes than there are in Paris, 47 Picassos, that's just absolutely laden with work, and some so intense that we believe that this kind of place to step outside and read a book as you're in the gallery sequence was important.
And then there's also a place, so this is, one insertion was a garden and the other insertion was a classroom.
Here we are looking at the garden, actually. We're one level below grade, and we have a garden with ferns in the bottom and then sour gums or sweet gums, pardon me, and ginkgos. Here we are actually one level below grade. Barns collected pots, and they were always in the basement of the barns. We put them down in the new basement. We have an auditorium and classrooms and a library down here, but people can actually step out into the garden and also get a cup of coffee down here. The conservation lab, done by Sam Anderson. And then I think we're down to just two more projects. This is the Asia Society in Hong Kong, another project we won in a competition, another one that we struggled with, but we're using as a precedence before this is a house in Arizona we did years before where we actually connected two parts of a house across a very shallow arroyo that runs between the blocks. And this project is right in the heart of downtown Hong Kong on a very, very steep site, really a hidden site, and our concept was a horizontal garden in a vertical city. The garden, this was the site 12 years ago when we went as competitors to look at it, and you can see it was really a jungle.
Yeah, this was an 11-year project, both because of SARS getting permission and the fact that it was a nonprofit. But it was an abandoned British barracks, and it was, as Todd said, a crazy jungle with people, sort of squatters, living in the barracks. And it was so strange because it was surrounded by all of these high-rises, but it felt as if you were in Hong Kong 150 years ago.
Yeah, these were our photographs at that time. The buildings were really falling apart. There were actually 4 buildings and there were 2 berms that needed to be saved. So this is a model of our project, which is to add a new building here, to ascend to the top of this building, and then to walk across a zigzag bridge because we wanted to avoid fruit bats that were in these trees, but also to enjoy the journey through the landscape to this upper level of the site. So the difference between this upper site where there are 3 munitions buildings and 2 berms to the lower site where we have this building from the 30s is a distance of about 50 feet, but the entire distance from the lowest part of the site to the top must be 150 or so.
In the change of grade.
And this is the completed project, taking a view from the Shangri-La Hotel right nearby.
There are so few low buildings in Hong Kong because the price of land is so high and because the land is always leased. So that's why we said this is the horizontal versus the vertical.
And this is the upper site. They seem to be completely disconnected. This site here where there were the three buildings from 1840s to the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and then these two large berms and then railroad tracks where they would take the munitions down and then cable them to boats in the harbor. And then this other building, the GG building. So our building adds this piece and adds elements to these pieces
Cuts
to bring
through
them
a berm
back to life.
and cuts through the top berm to connect everything.
Yeah. The plan, the gallery space, you can see the walls, and the outside walls are 8 feet thick here.
And a theater at the top.
Auditorium up here, offices and meeting rooms here, and in this building, meeting rooms and a cafe.
So the grade, as Todd says, is very steep from the bottom of the site to the upper part of the site. So here you see one of the older buildings, and floating above it is the new building. The space between that old building and the new building.
Place where you drop off a car. Actually, we make a wall to the jungle, and you can sense it through a slot in the wall. You can sense that there's a jungle beyond, but you are withheld from it, and then you step around the wall and you have water from the roof dropping down into a pool, and suddenly you hear the sound of water rushing through the nullah, and you really no longer feel like you're in the heart of the city, but you're in a jungle.
And the birds.
The top roof of the building. Again, the top roof of the building using a greenstone from China. Again, the top roof of the building, walking across horizontally to the old site through there. You can see that there's a bridge and a bridge below it in this section. That's the horizontal bridge, and then this is a 1 in 20 bridge that you incline up, but you're always protected by the bridge above, and all of the services connecting the sites are from the structure of the upper bridge.
And so here you are at the top, and you can see the tracks where the small trolleys used to run with the munitions before they were cabled down. Renovating the interiors of the older buildings.
And you can see there are allusions to Chinese gardens in our design. So, of course, we were thinking of many things, but the idea of a Chinese garden with its different sort of events was really important to us.
This is one of the buildings with the very thickest walls, which was made into an art gallery. And then a cut through the berm, looking back to the new building.
And then Hong Kong, which is everywhere around you. This is virtually the final project, and this is under construction. It's 2 ice rinks. Jim also mentioned that they're in Prospect Park, but the precedent for this was the Neurosciences Institute done 20 years ago in La Jolla, where we tried to build most of our building into the ground. There's a building beneath this, and laboratories that sit beneath the ground, and a space that's made by the buildings themselves. And certainly that was a theme in the previous sketches. This is a sketch of that. This area of Prospect Park was always a very active area of the park. When Olmsted and Vox designed this, they had 3, came after Central Park. They believed it was better because it had this long glade of 1.5 miles of connected open space, a larger wood, which they liked very much, and a much larger lake. But as Central Park was artificial, and as Central Park in the last few years has come back to life.
So in their original plans, they had a carriage turnaround and something that they called Music Island. I think this was during the Moses years, but they filled in the area of Music Island and they turned it into an ice skating rink, and the carriage turnaround became, unfortunately, a parking lot. This was before, obviously, they made that ice skating rink and people actually used to skate on the lake itself. But here you can see the turnaround as a parking lot, and then the edge of the water filled in with the skating rink and the support facilities.
So they asked us to design an indoor ice rink, and we didn't like the idea of indoor ice rink. We wanted something more less aggressive in the space. This is the building that was torn down. It looks rather attractive there. What we decided was to create 2 outdoor rinks. This one is a free skating rink, and this is a hockey rink that's covered by a green roof that allows it to have an extended season. So these are used really during, they would be starting to be shut right now as Woolman Rink in Central Park is just closing down. The buildings themselves, large buildings that sit underneath the earth, and so we're bringing the earth up and the park up, so you really hardly notice the buildings, or at least that's what we hope and believe when it's done. But these will be the largest continuous artificial ice in the U.S. when it's completed.
So the buildings are much more, I think, our conception is that they're much more like retaining walls than buildings. They're not objects.
They do have big programs in them. They have a cafe and meeting rooms in through here and education rooms here, mechanical spaces and storage spaces for the park. And this side here is for ice skating and instruction and skate rental. In this rendering, this shows that there's a water play in the summertime in the very flat space that is the free skating rink, which is here. And yet this could be operating at the same time that could be used for rollerblading. Early sketches to show how one would come upon the building. A very narrow passageway where you suddenly inside the building and a tile wall that's going to be installed here. The ceiling also takes this idea of the ceiling as a plane on which you can actually, a kind of painted surface.
So this is that
Canvas.
same narrow alleyway that's going to take the tile wall, and you're walking, this is really the entrance into the rink, and here you are underneath the rink, and you can see that the rink is this very, very dark blue, and the marks on it come from a drawing that Todd did, which is actually, I think, really started from looking at the marks of actual figures that you make on the ice when you're doing true figure skating.
So that's really, it'll be finished the later part of this year. I think it's been built very well. We've now just finished the pouring of this rink, and the buildings are being clad. And the final project comes from this Venice Biennale, where Billie and I were invited by David Chipperfield to participate in Common Ground, his Biennale this last year. And we chose this as an opportunity to ask friends to join us in contributing to extending the idea of common ground.
So his idea was, what is it that unites us rather than separates us? And in the very first images, you saw our apartment, and it's filled with lots of things that we love to have around us. And so we thought it would be interesting to ask our friends to fill a box with things that inspire them. And we asked that they not be architectural projects, but they be just things that they keep around them, that they love to have around them, that mean something to them. And of course that brought up the idea of the sort of Wunderkammer, the box of wonders, and also thinking about Joseph Cornell. So people sort of went about it in very different ways. Some people filled a box with stuff. Some people created an actual sort of Joseph Cornell finished piece. You all know the island, and you know where the Biennale happens. And at first we thought we would try to fit ourselves inside the Arsenale.
And we chose this site, or David was happy with us choosing that site. And these were we thought we'd make a room of boxes, and as we thought more about it, we realized that we had done this a few years ago and felt with our small project that we were utterly and completely lost in the Arsenale. And we asked him for something much more intimate and maybe not so important. And he gave us a wonderful space in the very back part of the Arsenale, and an area that he wanted to develop called the Garden of the Virgins. And in that, a building that we thought was absolutely fantastic. Casa Scaffale, meaning the house of shelves. It actually was a seed storage bin in the back, and had never only been used for an art biennale once, and this was it when we found it.
It actually
the day
was
we arrived.
a building in hiding.
Yeah,
So,
we'll go back. And
no, I'm not in charge.
so the seeds obviously seeded themselves, and the building then disappeared. The boxes that we had asked to be made, and we asked our cabinet maker, who does this, Stephen Eno, here standing in his shop in Paterson, New Jersey, to make neutral gray boxes, all the exact same size, that we thought could fit on the shelves. And then we sent them to people that we felt shared DNA. I mean, we realized that could have been a much bigger group of people, but we stopped at actually 35. Only one person didn't participate?
So there are people that worked for us, and there were people we worked for. There were people who were our students, and people who we feel we've learned from. And actually also a family member. We asked our son and his design partner to also participate.
So this was the day we arrived. It certainly was over 100 degrees. That's our son and Billie there and Steve and Eno. And
Looking very depressed because we were told that the boxes would have been unpacked and everything would be set up. And it was, 3 days before the thing was about to open, and there were a huge number of mosquitoes. And
well,
everybody
they weren't even set out like
and
this.
everybody had thrown their junk inside, their garbage inside our building, and we finally pulled our boxes out and opened them up and are trying to figure out what we're going to do.
But it was a fantastic experience. This is the installation, and this, Mac, I don't
There's
know
some
if you ever
friends
went
here.
there. This is Mac's motorcycle pants from, I'm going to say, a year or two ago, and a cape that Merrill sent in, which was made of chicken feathers.
Well,
That came in the box when they sent this to Italy. The Italian authorities rejected it.
And sent it back.
So we brought it over in our suitcase.
And then I guess it's a set of legs that your studio made in order to go with the pants, I think. Anyway, we had to figure out what to do with these things, so we hung them in the doorway.
But Glenn Merkett and Wendy Lewin and a friend from California and W.G. Clark all just filled their boxes with stuff, so we put them in cases here. But this is Johanni Paulusma actually making his box. He used the lid and the box and then filled it much like a kind of Cornell box. He's got a husk of bread through there. He put his old passport over there. You can imagine that's a reel from Tchaikovsky. This is Mac, and now this is an image you guys sent us. I think you expected it to be set up that way, but this was, I think this must be Merrill there. Ursula von Reiningsvoort, this is a wonderful sculptor who's a friend, and she filled her box with blocks. Actually, she made 2 projects for it, but the first one was far too fragile, and then came back and filled hers with blocks. Claudia Jungstra, our friend that we've mentioned, the felt artist, filled hers, is called Adoring Rumpelstiltskin. These are wool that she dyed from from
Onion
her sheep
skins.
and onion skins.
Yeah.
Toyo Ito filled his box with fragments from the tsunami and writings from people who had lost and felt lost by affected and lost ones from the tsunami.
This is Elias Torres and his partner, Jose Antonio Martinez, and they took the box and they made it a dollhouse with many different things that folded out.
And it also folded back up and became a complete box. Peter Zumthor wanted pigments set just so. He didn't return them in the box. He actually had an assistant bring them over and set them up. But at any rate, he was happy about this, and I don't think any of the pigments disappeared. We just had no case there.
Marwan Al-Sayed, who gold-leafed his box and had incense burning inside. And then Richard Meyer made a collage from books that were cut up, and you can see another piece by Annie Chu and Rick Gooding, who used to work in our office.
Tom Main couldn't help himself. Called this gold bullion. It was, in fact, fit perfectly in the box, and it was beautiful.
And then finally, the piece made by our son and his design partner, who they took the box and cut it up and made it a teeny tiny box and filled it with a magic 8-ball.
With the water from Venice in it. At any rate, this is really the end. I think that we wanted to end again with the hens and really talk about the issue of the work that we're interested in making, which is collaborative work, and which is taking architecture and, of course, knowing that it's much about abstraction and it's much about the beauty of the object, but it's really mostly about hands that make it and hands that live in it, and what we give and what we leave behind that really counts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, be happy to, and understand if people need to go.
Yeah, questions?
Any question is a good question. I don't know if the answers will be any good, but we're happy to receive some. Yes.
The texture, are there two different textures, or is the inside and the outside the same texture?
Of the stone,
Yeah.
there are actually quite a few different textures. The question is, what are the stone textures? We didn't focus on that. There are actually two different types of stone, basically coming from virtually the same location. One is called Ramon Gold, and that's a softer, redder stone that we used in the interior where it was shaded, and that would be more fragile relative to freeze thaw, and the other was Ramon Gray. And then we went to Bethlehem where it was cut and watched them cut, and then we have at least 5 to 6 or 7 different textures. One of them was kind of random hand that you begin to see the hand of the maker. Another one we called cuneiform writing, and another was sandblasted, and another just cut pure, and another brubbed.
But we learned a lot when we went to see where they finished the stone, because we didn't even know about the hand chiseling. And we went there and we saw a guy who was just hand chiseling, and it was random, and we thought that that was really beautiful. And then we asked whether they would chisel in a straight line, kind of straight line. And so that became another type. So it was really something that we found out only by going there.
And then we use them in strategic and we think logical ways. For example, you'd have to go there to know the signing. Yeah. So at any rate, again, it looks like we're actually, it was entirely just the people that were doing that and the way they could do it and how they could do it and would enjoy doing it that made that possible. And that really is most of the work we do, is trying to find people doing great things and just sort of managing them and moving them around to create something. Yes, you can finish that. You're going to finish, you're going to say something? Okay. Okay, anything else? Well, we don't need, oh, you're back. Okay, great. Okay, then we'll get some, finish, let's go.
You're being
You
very,
help us.
very indeterminate. There's a guy in blue, we'll do the guy in blue,
Yeah, okay.
and then we'll do you. And I think there was somebody really far, far back, but I'm not sure whether you're actually raising your hand or just having a thought.
Swatting a fly. Yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you could offer a little bit of your thoughts on the relationship between architecture and craft and art, and where you see your work positioned within that relationship.
Architecture.
Craft and art. Well, we're architects. First, I want to say architects are servants. And I think that's great. We serve. We only work because someone has something for us to do. They need to solve a problem. So that's really all we are. I would say that everyone who builds a building well is a craftsman. So that's a very simple thing. And if you're an artist, you're an artist. You actually create your own program, and you don't need a client. You need to conjure up a client and imagine that client. The client could be work you've seen in the past or something inside you, but they don't work for anyone, and we do. So I think it's very, very clear that those are the distinctions, and our life is the life of an architect. And again, that's why every project is different, because we see every opportunity, every site, every client as a different site. And with it inevitably comes a craftsman. And because we love art, we try to allow the art aspect to come in too, but we're not artists in any way.
But I would also want to say that, when you say that we are servants, I think.
Happy servants.
Happy servants. I think
Paid
if
servants.
if you believe in the service that you're doing, then it can be very noble. So it's a very positive thing. It's not a kind of negative thing where you're forced to do
What's
things
even
you don't.
bigger than that, because if you really serve completely, then the serve becomes, it all works together. If you do believe in service as such, the doctor and the architect, I think it's really a great place to put architecture in it, and it shouldn't be in a place of of architecture being an artist or working alone. And that's why we have to work together. That's why the studio has to work with us. That's why the contractor has to work with us. That's why the client is crucial. Yeah. There? Okay, Bill, you take care of this. There's more.
Okay, there's a guy in the back, and then you, and then you.
I'd like to know a little more about when you choose to invite collaborators into your process and when you would choose to sort of create something yourselves. And I'm thinking of the ceiling in the ice hockey rink, where you decided to draw and inscribe your own drawings on the ceiling. But then when you were invited to the Venice Biennale, you decided to invite other people in to your project. And I just wanted to know how do you think about making those decisions?
Well, I mean, the ceiling is a reflected ceiling plan, and we're responsible for the reflected ceiling plan. So that should be our territory. You know, I got lights up there, I got some ducts up there, and I've got a bunch of other crap, and it needs to absorb sound and so on and so forth. So it does seem that's absolutely the architect's responsibility. I do think that
You could have asked somebody else to do the drawing.
I didn't want to.
So that's the real answer. It's when you want to or you don't want to.
Well, there are some things it's clear that we can do some kind of low-level graphic design, and it's cheaper on the felt stuff for Chicago. And we worked with Pentagram, and they also helped us with the graphics a little bit, but all the shapes and stuff came from us. I don't consider that very artistic, or the tile stuff very artistic, honestly. The felting, when you saw Cloudy doing felting, that's really an artistic effort. And I think largely it's about architecture that is our world. And landscape also has its artistic components too. And landscape architects with whom we've worked have been very, very important. But so is a mechanical engineer and a structural engineer, and the guy who builds it.
You're wondering.
Okay.
Okay, the person here? Yeah. Oh, whoops. Okay, and then. Oh, is it not? No, wait, now it's you. Now it's you. No, go. You could talk, though.
I can talk pretty loudly. Okay, when you answered Nicholas's question about the relationships between art, craft, and architecture, you were stressing the yikes. You were stressing the importance of the client in your working method, and I was wondering if you thought architects could be their own clients in any long-term basis.
I don't think so. I don't think so, but I'm sure that some people believe that. Billie?
I think you can, I think if you're doing some theoretical work or you're...
Development work? Yeah, if you're...
I don't...
Are you less of an architect if you're a developer?
I think if you call yourself a developer, you're a developer. I'm an architect, I'm an architect. I mean, if I'm an artist, I'm an artist. I'm not saying, though, that I don't have artistic interests. And I don't say that I don't have other interests. Certainly, I think we're canny in other ways. And a developer can be artistic or architectural, too, and even can be an architect. And one can be an educator, and we teach, but I'm not an educator. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that it seems to me very important to try to determine what you really are at all times. And I'm a partner. I'm one of two, and I'm an architect. That's all. It's really important to decide what you are and what you're not. It's helping to shape you as you get older, and I think it's deciding what you're not is one of the most important things in learning what you are. Sorry.
I
almost thought Jack was going to take my question, but then he went in a different direction. So in response, again, to the architecture, craft, and art, your relationship with your clients, it sounds like the same question, but it's not, is it seems that it is completely directly related to your work. And so in a way, it seems that you are harnessing the craft of client curation, that there has to be some play in that. And so can you tell us how you enter into those relationships, institutional relationships or cultural relationships? And then if you're starting off and you don't have a portfolio of work that is standing behind you, and yet you believed that it's important to have clients that have the same values as you, would you recommend a place to begin?
Okay.
Well, I mean, in a couple of situations today in the school, I was saying that you need to develop a way of having great clients, because you can't, the way you make great work is to have great clients. But you don't have to have a great client who needs to build something big. It can, if that person can be a great client and you can design a doorknob for them, but it will be a great project. And so I think that you need to be able to find those people who have a belief in your vision, and it can be very, very small, and then the small leads to other things. I mean, we all started small, and in New York, we were doing bathrooms and kitchens for a long time until we got a loft, and that was really exciting. And then, you know, from there, well, the first building at Princeton, I don't know, how old were you?
Well, I was in my 40s. You know, I had done one house before my 40s. And interiors, I loved interiors. I still believe, I think interiors are where you start if you want to start by yourself. And New York's a good place because they're always tearing up some interior. And we did commercial work, and we believed that was a very good way by which we could exercise our muscles. And as we slowly began to see in both the commercial work and private work, we began to see that there were pieces of that work that we cared and were transcendent, not the whole thing. And they began to be bigger and bigger elements. And it takes a long time, but it's a great long life. So I would have said, I mean, I'm sorry, it's still going on. It's really okay.
But I want to go back to the developer and architect question, because what you didn't say was you tried to develop a project and be an architect on the project.
I screwed it up massively.
Once, too. So it was a series of barns that were put together, and so Todd, and that's when I first started working for Todd, and he was paying for it. He was the developer, and he was the architect, and it's very hard to wear those two hats at the same time.
I was miserable at the end. I
So
just
I
felt
would-
like I'd screwed everything up and barely got out with my hide.
You know, one person is kind of fighting against the other, and so that's why I think it's probably better to choose one side or the other. Can't
Keep going.
remember.
I get to choose this time. There.
Hi. Thank you very much. No, I'm relating back to Nick's question about materials and your use of materials. So I think as architects, we're not really taught that much how to use materials. It's not really part of the beginnings of education. It's more about program and sequence of spaces. So I'm just curious on how you make that material engagement and how that becomes more of an architectural as opposed to the craft, how you maybe bring it from the craftsman, translate to architecture.
Okay. First, all buildings are made of concrete, and we don't
Well,
do
not
our.
all buildings are
There's somewhere down there's a piece of concrete in the ground. And I believe that concrete is the foundational material of all architecture, and it should be brought up not in its Kantian form, but in its raw form, and it needs to play some role. And it's usually cold and crude. So I just think that's the first material. Glass is the second material. So far, we've only got cold materials. The third material has to be something that's warm, because actually, the way we live, we all live, we want warmth in our lives. Wood is a reasonable one, fabrics or other things. And I think you slowly build on it. And when we choose to build in a place like the parkway at the Barns, we just knew it was going to be limestone. We wanted to fit in. When we built in Chicago, we wanted to fit into the campus. So we said it's limestone, not exactly the same limestone. So you begin, when we worked in Phoenix, precast was the least expensive way to build. We built in precast. So I think you choose that material, and then you explore once you know the material, and then you begin to explore what you can do with it.
But are you not asking how that happens in school?
Well, that's the practical way. I didn't learn much in school. I mean, I learned by, sorry. I didn't. Some of us don't learn much. I went to that same school Jim did. We didn't learn shit. No, it wasn't a great student. I mean, you just learn in life, and that's what, again, I bring back to the issue of living life and understanding actually the critical relationship in your life, and then how you need to, in a way, take your life and make it work into your work so that there's not such a disjunction. I worked for Richard Meyer for 6 years, and I always felt like there was a kind of disjunction there between the stuff that we presented and the way actually I wanted to live. So I was furious by that. Yeah. I was furious that there wasn't that connection, and slowly you make it.
I mean, I also think that the whole understanding and thinking about materials has really to do with after school. I mean, I think it's like learning to cook. You can read about cooking and you can write about cooking, but until you're actually in the kitchen with the stuff, that's when you really sort of understand the materials. So I think it's very hard to.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's for later.
Well, but I think I actually still believe there are principles. The principle of the ground plane being the most important plane we have in our lives. This is the surface where Earth connects to sky. This is the surface on which we've called a campus. It's the surface we're all equal. You have to respect that as a surface. And I do believe that buildings that we make are heavy, and even a glass building is heavy. And so you have certain principles in your life that you begin slowly to apply to your design. And it does take a very, very long time before you get there, but it is a good long life, if you're lucky.
So we do one more question and let people escape?
Yes, there's one here. Yeah. But we're happy to.
Hi. So I wanted to ask whether the closing of the American Folk Museum and the impermanence of the use for which you designed the building, has that changed your attitude toward architecture and design?
It's a very interesting question. One is wounded. It's like losing a child. You believed in what you were doing, and I still believe in what we did. I don't actually believe in what MoMA does, although I believe it's a great institution. The neutering of art, in a way, so it can be analyzed, is just one of the things that goes on today. So I think, you know, I think I'd like to blame everybody else, but you have to take that as a lesson. And maybe we were too particular. That's all I could say. Maybe we could have backed off a little. When you're young, you're doing all you can. That was our first significant building, and we brought it in at very, very low cost, and I believed in it. But when you see that it's not well, you wonder whether you did something to your child. And so, yeah, I'm sorry. It's horrible. I'd love to blame the world outside, but I wonder. But I wouldn't change because I believed in what we did, and that we did it with love and care and the best effort we could ever give. And I think it's an amazing building. I don't know what to say, but these things happen.
Well, I think though, you asked, does it change our attitude towards what we do? And I think we very much live our lives in architecture with this desire to make these things that will last. And if for one reason or another they don't, that's very difficult. But it doesn't stop us from wanting to make these places on the earth that will last.
And that are particular and not generic, and not superficial in any way. So, I don't know. rough last question.
Time for a drink.